Hello, everyone. In our lesson today, we discuss questionnaires. To begin with, what are questionnaires? Questionnaires are a research tool. Understand this. Questionnaires are a research tool that is used to collect data from responses. So, we're talking about questionnaires being a research tool. Questionnaires being a research tool. Number one, what sort of research tool is this? A research tool that has preset questions, a research tool that has preset questions, and these preset questions are used to be able to gather data. Now, these preset questions are used to be able to gather data, to be able to gather information. Now, this information that we're gathering could be for various purposes. This information could be gathered to be able to study about an individual's or a society's attitude towards something, behavior towards something, their opinions over something, so on and so forth. Now, these questionnaires could be administered, they could be self administered, or they could be sent through post, or in this day and age, you could use these questionnaires. You could send these questionnaires online as well. Now, to begin with, or rather say, before we begin, I'd like to have a look at the pattern or the questions that we've had on research methods from 2021 onwards, and show you the questions that we've had on questionnaires themselves. So if we have a look at these questions in March 2021, question number 2B was explain two strengths of close-ended questionnaires as a research methods. The first question. If I take this a little further, we have had another question that would require directly content from questionnaires. That is this one that we had in November 2021, variant 1.1. And the question over here reads, explain two limitations of using a postal questionnaire as a research method. Taking this ahead, if I may show you more, we have had, this is the same question. So this is essentially the same. Explain two limitations of using a postal questionnaire as a research method. I hope I'm not missing on anyone. Taking this a little further, we have had another question in May 2022, variant 1.2, and the question over here reads, explain one strength and one limitation of questionnaires as a research method. Taking this a little further, May 2023, variant 1.1, and the question over here reads, explain two strengths of questionnaires as a research method. November 2023, variant 1.1, there's a question that reads, explain two reasons questionnaires are considered high in reliability. November 2023, variant 1.3, the same question again. Explain two reasons questionnaires are considered high in reliability. And May, June 2024, variant 1.3, the question over here reads, evaluate the view that questionnaires have limited value in sociological research because they lack validity. Now, these were a couple of questions. I hope I didn't miss out on any. If I did, you could have a look at them as yourself as well. So we're talking about questionnaires. What are questionnaires again? Questionnaires are a research tool through which you have preset questions. Preset questions are being used over here to be able to gather information. What sort of information are we trying to gather? What sort of information do sociologists usually gather? They gather information that has to do with the attitudes, the behavior, the opinions of individuals. Typically, these questionnaires are used there either self-administered, or in other words, when the sociological research worker or the sociologist designs a questionnaire and distributes them himself or herself to be able to gather data. They could be sent through post, or they could be sent online as well. Now, before I get into more of details regarding questionnaires, let me remind you all, questionnaires are an example of quantitative data. When you talk about questionnaires, questionnaires are typically seen as the primary sources of quantitative data. For this, we need to know what quantitative data is. Quantitative data is the data that gathers numbers, statistics, graphical representation, so on and so forth. So for today, we would be discussing questionnaires. What exactly are questionnaires? Questionnaires in this context, we talk about questionnaires as primary sources of quantitative data. Now, there are other sources of quantitative data, primary sources of quantitative data as well, that we would be discussing in another lesson. They are structured interviews and experiments. So now we're talking about questionnaires, structured interviews, and experiments, them being examples of primary sources of quantitative data. Let's begin and take this a little further. So, as we speak about questionnaires over here, it is important that we know that that is important that we know that both questionnaires and structured interviews, they are examples of social surveys. Now, I'm talking about this one over here. Both the questionnaires and structured interviews, they are seen to be examples of, or they seem to be examples of social surveys. For this, we need to understand what the word social survey over here means. The term social survey refers to the systematic collection of the same type of data from a fairly large number of people. So, a social survey is when you are systematically collecting information, when you're systematically gathering information from a relatively large source of people. We use the term social survey for that. Now, this when you talk about social surveys usually use quantitative data, but there could be qualitative data as well. The keyword to social surveys is gathering data from a large group of people in a systematic manner. So, taking this a little further, moving on, if we talk about these questionnaires, they're usually self-administered. Now, what does the word self-administered questionnaire over here mean? What does the word self-administered or self-completion questionnaire means? A questionnaire that the respondent fills himself or herself. So over here, I'm talking about self-completion questionnaires. Self-completion questionnaires. Now, these self-completion questionnaires, we use the word self-completion questionnaires to refer to questionnaires that are filled by the respondent himself or herself. So I might as well write this down. Questionnaires, and I'd expect you to do the same. I'd want you to write this too. Questionnaires that are filled out by the respondents themselves. Now, these self completion questionnaires or self administered questionnaires, they could be either delivered to the respondents by post, by email, through the internet, or could even be handed over by hand. Now, questionnaires, like I said, typically comprise of a list of questions to which participants provide the answers. Now, the questions are usually designed to measure, for instance, I mean, there are many phenomenons, there are many aspects that we could gather information on as a research worker, as a sociologist. But you could be gathering information on the trends, you could be gathering information on the amount of interest people show towards a particular social phenomena, or the people, or the voting pattern of individuals on the basis of, let's just say, gender, ethnicity, social class, so on and so forth. Now, let's just say there's an election to be taken place, that is election that is expected, and I mean, pre-elections, you could distribute questionnaires to be able to find out what particular political party would an individual be interested in voting for. And then once you have your data collected, you could very easily figure out patterns, you could figure out trends, you could see, you could differentiate individuals on the basis of their gender, on the basis of the social class they belong to, on the basis of their ethnic origin, and you could see what particular political party is getting more of votes from, let's just say, males as compared to females. What particular political party has more of votes from the ethnic minority, so on and so forth. Now, taking this a little further, I'd want to quickly hop on to the type of questions over here. Now, as we talk about the type of questions, typically we would, or rather say for the sake of understanding, let's initially divide these different types of questions into close-ended and open-ended questions. I just write this down and I'd expect the same from you. We're talking about type of questions. And as we refer to the different type of questions over here, we are referring to close-ended questions, and then we compare them with open-ended questions. So the first category over here would be close-ended questions versus open-ended questions. Now, about close-ended questions and how they're different from open-ended questions. When we talk about close-ended questions are usually the questions that have required number of that have a number of options available, right? So when I use the word closed-ended questions are the questions that have a number of options available, and the respondent is expected to pick up the most suitable option that works for them. And on the other hand, when I use the word open-ended questions are the questions that do not limit the respondent to be choosing their option from the available few. So when we talk about open-ended or closed-ended questions, these are questions that allow the respondent to answer in so I'm sorry, I did not categorize them here. So when I talk about closed-ended questions are the questions in which, I'll just write it, questions in which the range of responses is fixed by the researcher. Now, a typical example that I use very often, for instance, if you put up a question that says that has to do with the oral hygiene or the oral health of an individual, the question, let's just say, is how many times do you brush your teeth in a day? And you could leave the respondent with a couple of options. Let's just say once, twice, thrice, and none of the above. Now, do you see how the respondent has different options and the respondent can choose a particular option? Whatever the option is that works for the respondent would then choose that particular option. So, like I said, when I use the word close-ended questions, I'm referring to questions that have a limited range of options that are available there for the respondent to choose from. And on the other hand, if I use the word open-ended questions, open-ended questions are the questions which allow the respondent to answer in their own words. Questions that allow the respondent Now, questions that allow the respondent to answer in their own words, we usually refer to them as open-ended questions. And if I may give you guys a quick little example over here, an example would be, what toothpaste do you use and why? Now, if I talk about the comparison between these two different type of questions, that is closed-ended questions and open-ended questions, you see, I'm sure that closed-ended questions would help the researcher gather quantitative data or numeric data, quantitative data. Closed-ended questions could be quick. This could help with comparisons. Comparisons get easier. It gets easier for the respondent, for the researcher to make a comparison. Let's just say there is a classroom filled of 100 students, and the researcher could within minutes gather this information about the amount of times individuals brush their teeth in a day, and then very quickly calculate the percentage of students within a class that happen to be brushing their teeth once a day, twice a day, thrice a day, or none of the above. So there's a limitation to this as well. I mean, there are numerous limitations. I just quickly want to give you all an overview to them. If we talk about, I mean, let's just say there's an individual who brushes his or her teeth 4 times a day. That particular individual would be left with no other option but to opt for this point that says none of the above. And this doesn't really, I mean, when you come across the word none of the above, this usually leaves you under an impression that the person does not brush his or her teeth at all, which might not be true. So you see how the researcher or how the respondent is only restricted to the available options, restricted to available options only. Another limitation to this could be the respondent might, yeah, so the respondent cannot provide any details, no details. I mean, you just asking them data and you're giving them a number of options that are available, and that's about it. If I quickly take this a little further and talk about open-ended questions over here, open-ended questions again have a couple of strengths and limitations to them. If I talk about these open-ended questions usually allow the respondent to gather detailed information. And the more information you have, the likelihood of you being able to understand what you're trying to figure out or what you're trying to understand increases. So you're providing the respondent with an option of saying whatever he or she wants. But a drawback to this could be a lot of information can possibly lead to, can make analysis tougher. So this is more time consuming too. Interpretation of the information received may lead to bias. I mean, there's a long list. We could go on and on and on. But now, just to give you all a basic little idea, I think this would suffice. We were talking about the type of questions. Like I said, there are two main type of questions, to name them: closed questions and open questions, or open-ended questions. In closed questions, the range of responses is fixed by the researcher. The respondent, that is the person from whom information is sought, has to select their answers from two or more given alternatives. There could be, you could also have a question that says, do you have a brother or sister? Please tick as appropriate and simply give the respondent with two options, that is yes and no. Now, taking this a little further, if we move on and we talk about, if we move on and talk about Open-ended questions, like I said, open-ended questions ask respondents to answer questions in their own words. There might be several lines that are left blank in the questionnaire for the respondent to write their own answers. Open questions give the respondent more freedom to respond in their own way. So when you're providing the respondent with more of freedom, the feel respondent might feel like he or she has control. Respondent might feel like they have control. I'm short on space. They have control over the situation, or they're given an option of saying whatever they want to say. Unlike a close-ended question where you have limited number of options that are available for you. Now, if I may take this further, and we talk about the construction of questionnaires. Construction of questionnaires, or constructing questionnaires. Constructing questionnaires. Now, questionnaires are based on the idea that all respondents answer exactly the same set of questions. Now, when I say questionnaires are based on the idea that all respondents answer exactly the same questions, let me remind you all, the paper that you sit for in your CAIs is an example of a questionnaire, because remember, you along with all of your classmates, you sit for the same paper. This means that any differences in the answers should indicate real differences between them. The questions must mean the same thing to all respondents so that their answers can be directly compared. The researcher must ensure that the questions are clear and unambiguous. So while you are constructing your questionnaire as a researcher, it is your responsibility that you ensure that the questions are clear and unambiguous. There's no ambiguity in the questions, and all the respondents should be giving the same meaning, should be giving the same meaning to the questions. Or, in other words, it is essential that the respondent understands what exactly the researcher or the sociologist is trying to figure out. Now, allow me to give you an example over here. In our CIs, a problem that we usually come across is many students not understanding the question. If a student is not able to understand or comprehend the question well, that usually leads to the student not being able to get the marks he or she wishes to get. So it is pretty important that, and of course, I mean, when you that the example that I just gave you was in terms of your CIs, and when you talk about CIs, the Cambridge does look forward, or the Cambridge does try to test your level of understanding of the question too, because you being able to understand the question is very important for you to be able to answer the question correctly. So all the respondents should be given the same meaning to the question, or they should all understand the meaning of the question, or they should all understand what the researcher is trying to ask in a particular question, through a particular question. So the researcher must ensure that the questions are clear and unambiguous, that participants are able to understand the words and phrases used, and that the instructions for completing the questionnaires are straightforward. So another point that should be kept in mind while constructing questionnaires are instructions provided to respondents should be clear and straightforward. This would eventually help with the researcher being able to gather qualitative, good quality data. Now, if participants cannot understand the questions, they might feel stupid, that might offend them. So in this case, it is which of course is an ethical issue, but that's a separate thing that we'd be discussing later on. So in this case, what usually happens is researchers typically conduct a pilot study. They typically conduct a pilot study, and I just write it down and then remove it just in case if you're interested. We're talking about a pilot study. What exactly is a pilot study here? When I use the word pilot study, a pilot study is a small scale study, a small scale study conducted before the actual study to check for the feasibility of the research, or how feasible is the research that you're trying to conduct as a researcher. Now, a pilot study is typically conducted before the researchers are actually before the researchers actually start distributing questionnaires. And the reason behind conducting these pilot studies or a small scale trial run, you could refer to this as a small scale trial run. Through this trial run, the researchers try to figure out what possibly could go wrong, what are the questions that maybe require a bit of alteration here and there, so that there is more of clarity and less of ambiguity, and every respondent understands the question like he or she is expected to understand it. Now, taking this further, if we move on, we could also speak about the concepts of operationalization and coding. We're talking about the difference between operationalization and coding. What exactly is operationalization, and how is operationalization, or rather say, how is operationalization helpful when it comes to conducting a sociological research? So the word operationalization over here means to translate abstract concepts into a form that can be measured. Understand this: anything that is abstract, right? Now I've seen many students getting confused with the word abstract. I'm sure you've heard of abstract paintings, right? So abstract, translating anything abstract, any any abstract concept being translated in a form that can be measured. We use the word operationalization for that. Now, for instance, allow me to give you an example over here that would help you understand this better. If we talk about operationalization, let's just say if I want to conduct a research that has to do with the relationship between your age and, let's just say, your memory, right? If I want to conduct a research that has to do with the relationship between age and memory, and if there are three categories of age that we're using over here, let's just say young, middle age, and old age. You know what? The meaning participant number one might give to young would be different from the meaning that participant number two might give to the word young. So, and the difference might be even more when you compare, when you talk about participant number three or participant number four. So, this gentleman or this young lady A compared to B, compared to C, compared to D, until and unless they all unanimously agree on what they mean when they use the word young. Let's just say young is 18 to maybe 30, right? So if they're all agreeing to this particular definition, only then would this research or the findings that we gather from this particular research make use, be the findings that we receive from this particular research might be useful, right? Otherwise, now let's just say this person, that is person number A, thinks young is 18 to 30, and whereas participant number B thinks young is 16 to 22. Participant number 3 feels young is 15 to 19. And participant number D, that is participant 4, thinks young is, let's just say, 18 to 39. Now, in all four of these cases, until in the case of this particular example, till the time all four of these participants, they all unanimously agree on what they mean when they're using the word young, middle age, or old age, the research or the conclusion or the findings or the results of that particular research might not be very useful, because they did not all understand it the same thing in the same manner. So operationalization, if I may put it here, operationalization is the process of defining. I'd expect you all to be writing this with me. Operationalization is the process of defining and measuring abstract sociological concepts. I mean, this could be, if I give an example over here, we could talk about social class. I just give you an example of age. For instance, you want to operationalize this, you want to figure out what or how you would differentiate amongst individuals on the basis of the social class they belong to. You could use different indicators. I mean, let's just say you decide that you want to use an individual's income as an indicator, or you could use, let's just say, an individual's occupation as an indicator. I mean, there has to be some way. Until unless you have a way, until unless you have a mechanism through which you're able to measure the information that you're trying to measure or test, you cannot really conduct a research. Now, I hope this makes sense over here. We were talking about the term operationalization here. When we use the term operationalization, operationalization is the process of defining and measuring abstract sociological concepts, example your social class, in a way that makes them measurable and testable, right? So taking this ahead, I hope everyone's clear with this word abstract. I see a lot of students getting confused and about this. Now, the word abstract refers to something that is an maybe an idea, right? Abstract art, again, to help you understand this in the most easiest of manner. So we were talking about operationalization and coding. When we talk about operationalization and coding, yeah, so when we talk about operationalization and coding, questionnaires are designed to measure things. In order to do this, those things, that is those concepts or variables, must be operationalized, or in the easiest of way, they should be put into a form that can be measured and quantified. That's the easiest, I believe, to be put in a form that could be measured and quantified, to be put in a form that can be measured and quantified. Now, taking this further, if we talk about some concepts now, however, When we talk about concepts such as beliefs and attitudes, them being operationalized, they may not measure what they're supposed to measure. It is often difficult to assess whether operational definitions provide valid measurements or not. Now, this is something that we would, of course, discuss in further detail when we'd be studying validity. So, taking this further, if I move on and we talk about response rates here, response rates. Now, of course, if you are distributing questionnaires, if you're designing a questionnaire, you would want people to respond to it. Let's just say you distribute 1,000 questionnaires and you get some 20 responses in return. That would make it very difficult for you as a researcher to be able to figure out what you actually were intending to figure out. So your response rate plays a very important role over here. And of course, if I may quickly give you an overview to this. And if I may give you a quick overview to this, the response rates of self-administered questionnaires that you distribute face to face might be high as compared to the questionnaires that are sent through post. I mean, not many people would be ready to uh, go through the hassle of filling out a questionnaire and then posting it back to you. And likewise, if I talk about a comparison over here between face-to-face questionnaires to postal questionnaires to online questionnaires, for online questionnaires, that there might be another issue. I mean, there might be many people whose mailbox might automatically throw your particular questionnaire into their junk mail, which again leaves you with a very low response rate. Now, as we talk about response rate, what does the word response rate over here mean? The response rate is your response rate is the percentage of the sample, and in our case, what does the word sample over here mean? Just in case. Now, your response rate is the percentage of the sample that participates in the research, or you could say the percentage of individuals who complete the questionnaire in return. For this, it is pretty important that we understand what the word sample means over here. A sample is a subgroup of research participants from the larger group to be studied. Now, allow me to give you a quick little example over here. Now, if I say I want to conduct a research on the students who would be appearing for their AS Sociology exam, their CAIE Sociology exam in May, June 2025 from, let's just say, Karachi, Pakistan. Now, this is the group that I'm trying to conduct my research on. These are the characteristics of the group I want to conduct my research on. Now, this would be this you could refer to as my research participants or my target population? This is my target population, which over here was written as my research participants. Here you go. It's the same thing, right? Let's just say there are, for the sake of an example here, let's just say there are 3,000 students who would be appearing from Karachi uh, in May, June 2025. Logistic concerns, let's say if I'm not able to collect data from all 3,000 participants, what I do is from these 3,000 participants, I'd pick up a small little chunk, let's just say 10% of target population, and I collect my data from these 10% people. That would make it 300 individuals. So these 300 individuals would be my sample. Now, read this entire thing together so that it makes more sense. I'm trying to explain you what the word sample means over here so that you understand the word response rate, right? So, and for you to understand what the sample means, it's pretty important that you understand what the word target population over here means. When I use the word sample, your sample is a subgroup of research participants from the larger group to be studied. This is the larger group that you had to study. And out of this larger group, you chose a subgroup that you would now collect data from. This subgroup is your sample. Here you go. So this is your sample, and this is your target population. Now, taking this further, we were talking about response rates. The response rate is the percentage of the sample that actually participates in the research. For example, if half the sample completes a questionnaire, then the response rate is 50%. Now, taking this ahead, a low response rate may result in an unrepresentative sample. So, low response rate is, of course, problematic, which I mean, that would eventually affect the findings of your research. Those who do not respond may differ in important respects from those who do, for example, in terms of the age, gender, ethnicity, or social class. If this is the case, the findings may be biased. There are many reasons for non-response to self-completion questionnaires, including lack of time or interest. It is also easy to throw away the questionnaires with very few consequences to face. So response rate is uh let's conclude this here. For the findings of a particular research, it is important that the response rate is high for meaningful conclusions. Now, I hope this was helpful. I would now want to move on to a few strengths of the usage of questionnaires, and then I'd like to discuss a couple of limitations, or let's just say weaknesses to a questionnaires before I could conclude today's lesson. So let's quickly hop on to the strengths of questionnaires over here. Questionnaires could be cost effective. Of course, if you're comparing them with interviews, questionnaires could be a cost effective way of collecting large amount of data. You could collect large amounts of data. Now, as we talk about the strengths of questionnaires, number one, questionnaires are seen as a cost effective method that is used by sociologists to be able to collect large amount of data that helps them conduct their researches in a very efficient and a time saving manner. Of course, if you have quantitative data on you, your comparison gets very easy. Making comparisons is easier for the researchers. And of course, quantitative data helps with easier analysis through computers too. Now, we would sprinkle positivism, and I would like to sprinkle positivism and interpretivism to this. When I talk about positivists, as you all should be aware, that positivists support the idea of using quantitative data for conducting researches. If you talk about questionnaires, questionnaires are easier to replicate. What does the word replicate over here mean? Replicate means to repeat the same research in exactly the same manner. So questionnaires make it easier for the researcher to be able to replicate their researches. Of course, if there's a questionnaire I design, I could get, let's just say, 1,000 photostats to it, and then distribute the exact same questionnaire to 1,000 different participants, so that the responses, so that the answers that I get from those questionnaires can be very easily compared. Moving on to the limitations of questionnaires. The limitations of questionnaires here, they might have a low response rate as compared to, let's just say, interviews, which might lead to biased findings. Why biased findings? Because you know what? If 20% of your if your response rate is 20%, that is only 20% of the people you have distributed your questionnaires to fill them out and return them. That automatically means the findings that you are coming that you come up with would only be based on 20% responses, and these 20% people might be doing it for you. These 20% people might have some or the other interest in the research that you're conducting, and so on and so forth. Taking this ahead, this questionnaires for using questionnaires to be used as a way through which you could collect your data. Another problem that you might come across over here would be them not being appropriate for some research participants, because for questionnaires, for especially for self completion questionnaires, there is literacy that is required. There could be language barriers. Some participants might not understand those questions at all. Other participants might understand those questions partially, which might again affect the overall findings of your research. They say questionnaires lack validity too. Lacking validity, or in other words, that they're not able to measure what they're supposed to measure. The word validity over here, when a researcher is successful in measuring what he or she is supposed to measure. Validity has to do with accuracy of any research findings. So, a few ways through which the validity of the data that is collected through questionnaires might be questionable. Amongst them, the first one, interpretation could be a problem. This is something I discussed a minute earlier, too. Number two, some might not find the questions relevant to them. Participants might not be able to relate. Participants might lie. Participants might lie. because of, let's just say, social desirability. They want to leave a very good impression of themselves. Now, when we talk about these questionnaires, the validity of questionnaires is questioned by some sociologists, such as interpretivists. Know this for now that positivists, I mean, for now, if I may just put it here, positivist, if I talk about positivism and interpretivism, positivism, interpretivism, positivist support quantitative data, quantitative data. Interpretive support qualitative data. Quantitative data is data through numbers. Now, this is a bit of information. This is a bit that I wanted you all to have a basic idea on questionnaires. And see, we, like I had shown you shown you all these questions earlier. This question away that reads: explain two strengths of close-ended questionnaires as a research method. Again, explain two limitations of using a postal questionnaire as a research method. Explain two limitations of using a postal questionnaire as a research method. Explain one strength and one limitation of questionnaires as a research method. Explain two strengths of questionnaires as a research method. Explain two reasons questionnaires are considered high in reliability. Explain two reasons questionnaires are considered high in reliability. And the last question over here: evaluate the view that questionnaires have limited value in sociological research because they lack validity. Now, this was just to show you how knowing these questionnaires is super important. And this is, of course, a preliminary or a basic lesson to questionnaires. And for you all to be able to answer these questions, I would, of course, be teaching this entire topic in a lot more detail, focusing especially on how these particular questions need to be answered. So I hope this much has been helpful. Take good care of yourselves. Stay amazing. Bye bye.